Good morning, Commissioners. Before you today to provide the first quarter of 2020 update on the out-of-home placement count as well as budget. So as you can tell on the point of time report for 2020, that would be this one. We currently have 128 kids in out-of-home placement. During the first quarter, we had 17 new kids that entered care. Now that's in comparison to 16 for the fourth quarter of 2019. 11 of those kids were placed due to parents' substance abuse and/or meth. 2 of them were related to domestic violence. 1 was placed due to being a risk. So 1 child was a risk to other younger kids in the home, so that child was placed. And then 3 were placed due to their own mental health or behaviors. We had 1 sibling group of 4, and as you know, that the larger the sibling group is, the harder it is to find placement. And then we had 4 sibling groups of 2. During the first quarter, we had 22 kids that left care. In comparison to the fourth quarter of 2019, we had 15 that left care. The kids that left care, 3 of them were due to their adoptions being finalized. 9 were reunified with their removal home, and then 10 of them were a transfer of custody to a relative. Currently, we have 13 in the adoption queue waiting to be finalized. We had finalized 39 adoptions in 2019. We have 0 that are placed in out-of-state placements. I'm sure you recall that at one point we had 8 that were placed in out-of-state residential treatment due to their mental health and not having a bed that was available here in the state. So we have 0. The last time that we had to place a youth in out-of-state was April of 2019. So it's been a year.
Good.
Yeah. Any questions in related to that first point of time?
I guess I got a couple questions. So going down the breakdown of placements, non-relative FC, what does FC mean?
That's foster care.
Okay.
Yep.
So relative, pre-adoptive, group home, I understand that, residential treatment, trial home visit. Can you just elaborate on that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so trial home visit is the parents have been involved in a CHIPS and they've been working their case plan. They're at a point of being stable and the children have been returned back in their care, but we still have the kids in our care and custody. So we're doing frequent, sometimes daily check-ins with the family to ensure the safety of the kids.
So they might be back with the parents, but they're still included in the 128?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And so March, so what is the total number of that? Is it 8 or?
Correct. We have 8 kids at this point in time that are right now at trial home visit.
Okay, so what does independent living mean?
Independent living would be a youth that is 17 to 18. We had 2 youth, you may recall last summer or fall, when I presented at the Committee of the Whole and then sent a resolution through the board requesting the board to approve 2 17-year-olds to move to independent living. So that meant that we were no longer looking for a permanency home for them. One had been a failed adoption that had come back into our system. Another one was ready to move on and be independent, and they had the skills to be able to live on their own. Primarily, though, that's usually when they're 18 and they still need some assistance through us. Then they're independent, though, maybe living in their own apartment.
And how long, once they're 18, if they're 18 and they're in this independent living, how long do we continue on with benefits?
According to statute, we're required to continue to offer that benefit to them up until the age of 21, under the conditions that they're complying with their case plan. So that would be attending school and or working, remaining sober, and any other requirements that we might put into the case plan to ensure that they're making good choices,
Okay.
helping them to make good choices.
Any other questions? Bill?
Mr. Chair, now last year, at the end of March, we were at 165, correct? And we're down to 128?
Yeah, correct. The bottom part here is a summary of the 2014 to the 2020. You'll see that we peaked in, in November of 2017, we had 195 kids in care, and then for the year of 2018, we had 287. So that's
Right.
just a summary.
Okay. And we're also seeing this, is adoption still working out really well?
Yeah, you may recall that we had an influx, and you'll see the numbers in 2016 through 2017. We had an increase of kids that came into care, and due to a number of factors, we were not getting permanency filed, whether transfer or adoption. And the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, we used temp, interns to shift some work, and then we had Chris Ott, who is full-time. She works on adoptions, and so we're still, I would say that we're now sustaining. We've cleaned up from the 2016, 2017. Technically, according to statutes, we're supposed to have permanency filed within 12 months. And so now we're keeping on top of, we're meeting the timelines to get those adoptions filed. Right now, a barrier to filing the adoptions is due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The court is not continuing. Our bench is not continuing with the adoptions. They're setting them out and not having the actual hearing held virtually to complete those adoptions. So we're making requests to court administration and the county attorney's office to try to set up some type of virtual means that we could get those adoptions, because we do, like I said, we have 13 right now. So.
There's been discussion also with this stay-at-home order that there's concerns about problems in the homes. What are you seeing there?
So while our intake numbers they took a dip those first 5 days when we had that emergency order. They were pretty minimal, and then our numbers have went back up to what they were in the fourth quarter and then the first quarter of 2020. However, what we're noticing is that we're having the percentage of cases being screened in. So, for example, during 2019, we had approximately 1,600 child protection intakes. Our assessments were a little under 300. So do the math. Now we're seeing that on any given day, let's say that we had 6 intakes, we're screening 5 of those in. And they're the more investigation versus the assessment route, because they're egregious harm, they're threatened injury, they're sex abuse. So then that's when we have that 24-hour response. And we're still conducting face-to-face for our intake and assessments, as well as for our ongoing cases. We're still having face-to-face contact when it's necessary to ensure safety of the kids. It's tricky to be able to investigate and interview a kid and ensure safety without seeing those families face-to-face. So.
Okay, can proceed.
For the corrections numbers, and we have Krista here if you have any questions for her specifically, currently, they only have 6 kids in out-of-home placement, and compared to fourth quarter, they had 10. They had 2 new kids that went into care. They had 3 that transitioned home. They had 1 that was discharged from probation, and then 4 that remained in care from the fourth quarter. And on another good note, they had 3 that moved to less restrictive option, and that's something that our teams have been working very closely on, is that when kids do not require the secure or detention type setting, that we're looking at whether it's a family foster home or a group home type setting to transition those youth to, while also ensuring safety of the community. They had 2 that went to jail and or CD treatment, and 1, of course, that had no change and remains in the same placement from fourth quarter. Any other questions on the point in time? The definitions.
Mr. Chair, just to ask, protocol for staff when they're working with And you said making some home visits also. What's the protocol that you have for the staff to follow?
So we do have PPE equipment available to them, as well as sanitized wipes in the car so that they're wiping down the county vehicles before and after visits. But most importantly, prior to making contact, we're asking that even at time of intake, that our intake worker is doing a screening, a COVID screening with our families. And then the ongoing worker or the assessment worker prior to going out would do that screening as well. And the screening is based on the CDC. So some of the questions would be, have you traveled recently? Have you been around anyone that's tested positive? Are you having any symptoms? Anybody in your household having any symptoms? So we're doing that screening. And then as much as possible, meeting with folks outside of their home, going for walks and having those conversations and not being in a confined, so also practicing the social distancing, and then
Okay, thank you.
gloves too. Yes, because I think that's a good point, Commissioner. Most importantly, we want our staff to be safe as well, so. On the back of the out-of-home placement, we do have the definitions, so you can reference. It's a very basic, and the code is just what we use for coding. The next sheet to review would be the budget. So Teresa Pickar puts together the worksheet for us, and she did put the highlights up on the top. So you'll see for 2020, our year-to-date actual spending is $258,000 under budget as of March 31st, 2020. The 2020 trend is that that will be projected to be 343 under budget if we remain consistent. And I would state that, the COVID is the pandemic, and some of our restrictions around doing visits and case planning and reasonable efforts could delay some of the permanency and or reunification of the kids, and that could impact our budget. We are also seeing an increase in requests for children's mental health and stabilization for kids in the home related to their own mental health. So our agency has been responding to that and working with community partners to meet those families' needs. So those would be two potential risks out there for us. Now, for first quarter, because we did have some higher invoices coming in, which those from fourth quarter 2019 come into 2020. So also that's a little bit of an increase in expenditures for the 2020. Overall projection is $59,000 down from the 2019 actual cost. So it would be a decrease in the overall out-of-home placement budget of 1% from 2019 to 2020.
Any questions? Nope.
No more questions? Okay.
Is that it?
Yeah,
Well, that was easy.
I know, 15
Yeah.
minutes short.
Holy cow.
I know, especially with me.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Good job.
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
As long as we're waiting for Deb Erickson to come up here, I'm sure she's probably on her way. Tim, the county administrator, I'd like to have you step up to the mic there, and I got some questions, and just, I guess I've asked you this before, I'd like to have a COVID-19 update from you on what you specifically are doing, because, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm finding out things from my constituents that I'm not hearing about from here, and I'm a little troubled about that. So, like the reefer trailer, I didn't know anything about that until I asked you, and you had purchased it. I don't know what, I asked you yesterday about the hotel rooms. I guess I'd like to know a little bit about that. And then, we're not in negotiations with Newest Home Care or anything to buy any property or anything?
No, sir.
Okay. If you could just let me know what's going on, and, I mean, what we're, I guess I should say I guess that's what we are doing, but maybe an update on what's going on as far as the county and a COVID update?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the COVID update is something that is rapidly evolving and has been over the course of the past month. So we are, I think to your point about providing shelter, we are required to provide shelter for the homeless during the COVID update. We are receiving some funds from the state of Minnesota to do that. I don't,
Because of the emergency order, or what, is that something, that's something different, or do we?
Oh, yeah.
That's something different than, because I know that the churches were providing that before, so this is because of the governor's emergency order?
New Pathways used to be providing shelter for the homeless and would move from church to church to church around the community. To the best of my understanding, that was discontinued about 9 months ago. Please don't hold me to that date, but they had discontinued that service. I think it is related to the governor's executive order and the state's response to COVID-19 that they have obligated counties to provide shelter for the homeless. And so we are doing that. We are trying to do it as judiciously as we can. I think one of the concerns is that we make sure that we provide that service for the homeless in Crow Wing County, but not for the homeless from every other county. And so we have had conversations with our community services department about we need these to be known people from our community. And the community services usually will have had some contact with a lot of the folks that we're dealing with. And so I don't have direct numbers. I think we're at about 20 people. So it's, significant enough. In terms of a COVID update, we have done a variety of things. We have been purchasing PPE, for instance, consistently throughout the COVID, as it has transpired. So we have been trying to stay ahead of what we anticipate the community's needs to be. I can't keep track of all of the things that staff is working on as we go through this. And so I apologize, Mr. Chair, if you feel like you're not being well informed, and I will do my best to try to make sure that you're better informed.
I have talked to Commissioner Franzine, and she, I don't know, you can speak for yourself, Rosemary, but I don't know, are you getting updates that you feel that you should know about, or can you pull the mic over towards you?
No, I don't like to hear about it from constituents, and that seems to be a good way to hear about things recently. Another thing I would like to ask you is, at our last county board meeting, you were supposed to have a meeting that afternoon with the grocers, and I asked for a report on that. I haven't heard back on that.
You are correct, and I apologize for that as well, Commissioner Franzine. We did meet with the grocers, and we had, I think, a constructive conversation with them, and it is about what they have learned from the COVID outbreak. They have learned a great deal about how to keep our consumers safe while they're in shopping, and so we got a long list of the things that they have done. Many of them, I think, are common knowledge because people are shopping at the grocery store. We are trying to work with the Chamber of Commerce as we speak to have meetings with other different kinds of industries. Camping comes to mind, resorts come to mind, even the golf courses that have recently been opened. How they reopen becomes important, So I've heard, for instance, a couple of instances where not removing the pin, so nobody touches the flag, no more than one per cart. And so that's our efforts, really, is to try to share information from one person to the next within these specific industries. We do not believe that safety is a competitive advantage. And so that's what occurred in the call. Commissioner Brecken was on the call. He may have something to add as well.
Yes.
Commissioner Brecken?
Yeah, I kind of found those calls really helpful and insightful for me and what some of our businesses are going through and the practices that they are. I know that Mr. Krisberg from Cub said typically they get to corporate direction, and I think that's one area that helps a little bit because they react a little bit quicker. But from the directions they were getting over a year, they might get 5, 6, suggestions to be, for better business practices. In the last 2 months, they've had over 80. And so trying to implement good business practices in this environment has been a real challenge for them and what's been involved. So, and those are things that we can kind of help share with different businesses as we hopefully they get ready to safely open as we go forward. So that's really, I think, what the purpose of that is. Mr. Chair, if I can ask too, in the like the trailer that was purchased and or the hotel rooms, are any of that part of our emergency readiness plan in regards of this type of situation?
In both cases, they are part of our emergency preparedness plans. We have what's called an all hazards emergency preparedness plan. And so we plan for all sorts of different hazards, pandemic, national or natural disasters. So it could be a tornado, the blowdown that occurred a couple of years ago, 2 years in a row up in the Sinisam area. We try to anticipate what are the kinds of things that can be disruptive to the community that emergency management will need to respond to. And so, yes, it is an all hazards emergency preparedness plan.
Now, I go back to New York because I know that they've got over 200 some trailers and some of the things there. But part of this is that we're working off the projections that the state's giving us of what we could have in deaths for Crow Wing County based on our population. Am I correct on that?
That is correct.
Okay.
And that's a widely varying, and you guys know this just from reading the news. Those projections have varied significantly from the beginning of this to current day. And I'm happy to say that current day, those projections are down quite significantly. I think all of us could agree. The degree to which we are prepared for something doesn't mean that we want that to happen. It just means that we are planful and prepared.
Right. And I do believe some of the PPEs that we've purchased have been from local businesses?
That is correct.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Mr. Barrows?
I think the questions that are being asked are excellent points. I think that what this points out during this time is that perhaps we as a board need to have a discussion about what level of preparedness that we might deem necessary for future events like this. Everybody in this country at this point, I think, has to step back, all of the electeds, and say we're being reactive rather than proactive. But I think there's a certain level, there's a sweet spot where we need to be prepared for these kinds of issues, and we weren't prepared this time. So I think that I mentioned to Administrator Houle yesterday that maybe this is a time to have a discussion with John Bowen about what he feels would be the appropriate level of preparedness so that we aren't trying to do it after the fact. I know that we're looking at the apex and trying to plan, so we're sort of planning for the worst and praying for the best, I think is the way to look at it at this point. But it's caught us off guard, and it's caused a lot of problems. So I think it would be worthy at some point in the near future to have a discussion on what level of preparedness the county should have and what role they play in these situations.
And that makes total sense, but where I'm coming from is every one of us sitting up here has an election certificate, and we're answerable to the people in this county. We are the elected people, and we have to know what's going on in this county so that we can relay that back to our constituents. We're their first point of contact, I believe. If you watch at 2 o'clock every day, it's the governor, the elected person in this state giving an update. It's not somebody working for him. It's him leading that. Just got to make sure that the elected people know what's going on so they can report to their constituents about what's happening in this county, what we're doing, what we're spending money on. There's a lot of anxiety out there, and people, when they come to their elected person and their elected person doesn't know the answer and should know the answer, that's quite concerning.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I can give you an example in my personal life. I've spent a lot of time in the ICU and emergency room down in hospitals in the cities for my youngest son. And you always have this group of doctors that come in, and they'd say, "Do you have any questions?" as the parents of this young man. And we would say, first of all, we're not the experts. We'd say that to ourselves, and then among our discussions when they weren't there. So when they'd leave, we finally got to a point after many of these confrontations, we decided to reverse it and say to them, "Tell me what I don't know, so I know that you know, so I do know.
Yes.
And tell me what the questions are I should be asking that I don't know I should be asking." And so I think that's the same thing we could say to the administrator. What do you know that I don't know? So it isn't just incumbent upon a conversation going this way, it's also this way. It's a two-way conversation that all conversations
And that's why I'm having
should
the
have.
conversation today.
Sure. But I just point that out that, you know, sometimes it takes us a while to catch on that it's a two-way conversation. It's not always quite apparent. I know that it took us as parents quite a while to understand that, and we were intimidated by the doctors because they're the smart ones. They're the knowledgeable ones. Then we decided we have to live with this young man for the rest of our lives. They don't. And so give us the information we need because we don't know the information. We don't even know the question to ask.
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Anything else?
Not for me. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, Mr.
Any other
Chairman.
questions? No other questions? Deb Erickson, elections update.
Real quick,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, has Mr. Coring been reelected yet? I just want to,
Excuse me?
has he been reelected yet?
This year? Not yet. We're
Not
getting
yet.
there. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. The information I want to just share with you today is some pre-planning of what we're doing here at the local level, of how we are getting ready for the election cycle this year as it relates now with COVID-19 considerations, as well as just a quick update on some state level legislation that is working through the mix right now and what that might mean to us. There has been some discussion at the legislature on what emergency considerations need to be taken into consideration for our elections processes. And as we know, anytime we have a presidential election year, it always increases our turnout. We see our strongest turnout in a presidential election year. 2020 was expected to be no exception to that rule. And we don't expect that there should be any reason why we can't continue to see record turnout here in Minnesota for our voters. One of the things that we've been looking at and that there has been some discussion on is if there needs to be changes to the law to allow for accommodations with regard to mail voting or with regard to polling place locations. Mail voting is currently allowed by statute to any township of any size or a city of under 400 registered voters anywhere outside of the 7-county metro area. So there is a regional restriction on mail voting, but we, here in Crow Wing County, we have 18 precincts that currently vote exclusively by mail. And I think as you move a little farther north, you see that that number continues to increase based on the fact that they're generally, what we see is they're more rural in population or more rural in nature and have less population. And part of the reason a township or a city might choose to change to mail voting is a couple of different reasons. Number one being that they may have a difficult time finding election judges to serve in their polling place in a regular election cycle. The other thing that we've heard is sometimes their polling places are not as equipped to be ADA accessible or even to have the infrastructure needed for technology purposes within a polling place. And the final thing that we often hear is that it is more cost beneficial for smaller precincts to go to mail balloting than it is to outfit a full entire polling place for an election cycle.
Deb, can I stop you there and ask you a question?
Sure.
So, voting not by mail, now if I can ask you this question, get it straight in my head. Voting not by mail, if you have 100 people, I'm just using, well, let's say you got 1,000 people in a district, what's the percentage of voting when they have their precinct? You don't have to be exact.
Mr. Chair-
Is it 60%? Is it?
In a presidential year, pretty much every single one of our polling places would see 75% turnout or
75%.
more. Yep.
So then the next question is what about the precincts that vote by mail? What's the percentage there? Is it more or is it less?
Mr. Chair, typically it is more. We see that the percentage of turnout for the mail ballot precincts is often 80, 85%, maybe even a little bit more. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, voters have found that the ballot comes to them and it's sent to them. They can vote it at their convenience at their home and they return it. They've found that it is a convenient method of voting for them. The other thing is, in all of our 18 precincts, our biggest number of voters in those precincts is about 280. We have a township that has just under 300 voters, registered voters. Most of them are 100 or less. So the turnout percentage is higher also because of the fact that we're starting with a smaller amount of voters who show up or who are in that precinct to begin with.
Okay.
But we have historically seen that those who do vote by mail ballot do see a little bit higher level of turnout than what the average would be across.
Sure. Okay, makes sense.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Franzi.
Deb, in a non-presidential election, what's the turnout?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Franzine, our county-wide level of turnout is right around 67 to 70% for most precincts, usually around that 67, 68, 70%. Mail ballot turnout, there's not really a decline in a non-presidential year for their turnout that there is in a presidential year. So you could still see some of those being that 80, 85% in some of those smaller mail ballot precincts.
Thank you.
Deb, do you have anybody that when the mail ballots go out, is there, I haven't seen what the packet looks like, but is there like a contact number that if somebody's going, I'm not quite sure how to fill this out, can they call here and have somebody kind of walk them through it or not?
Mr. Chair, the packet includes the ballot, the signature envelope, the secrecy envelope, and an instruction sheet. And the instruction sheet includes written instructions as well as visual instructions, like photos of how to complete the ballot, which is basically fill out your ballot, fold it up, put it in the secrecy envelope, put it in the signature envelope, and you have to have a witness. And that's the other thing with mail balloting or absentee voting. Either way that you look at it, if you vote by absentee ballot or you vote through the mail, all voters are required to have a witness if they are voting not in the polling place. The witness can be any eligible voter in Minnesota, or it can be someone like a notary public or a postal official or someone who is authorized to give an oath. That witness is verifying that the voter has a blank ballot, that the ballot isn't already filled out when they show it to the witness. The witness is verifying that the voter is who they are, that the ballot is blank, and that the voter filled it out themselves or used assistance that's allowed by law for that particular purpose. Our contact information is included on the instruction sheet. Okay. So if they have a question as to why am I getting this in the mail, number one, our name, our address, our phone number, our email address, our fax number, all of our contact information is included on their instruction sheet.
Okay, perfect.
The other piece with mail voters is they also have a polling place. The Crow Wing County Courthouse is the polling place for those who vote by mail. And there are some people who, for whatever reason, want to vote it in person. We have one resident of one of our mail ballot precincts. It's a precinct that's been mail ballot for probably almost as long as mail balloting's been allowed, which was, I believe, in 1987 is when the legislature first allowed mail voting. And this precinct has been a mail ballot precinct since basically that time. A voter who lives there likes to vote in person. Every year, they bring their mail ballot in to the courthouse here. They vote it in the voting booth, in our courthouse, in our elections office, put it in the envelopes. We witness the ballot for them, and they get their sticker, and they're very happy. But that's how they choose to vote. The other reason a person may choose to come in person and do their voting is because they don't have a witness available to them in their home or easy access to get a witness for that purpose. So they can bring their ballots here. Again, they have to be blank. If they bring it here to us already voted and in the envelope sealed up, we make them start the process all over again because we need to make sure that that person is the one who's actually marking their ballot.
So Deb, another question. So let's say I'm in a mail ballot precinct. I have until 8 o'clock on election day.
Correct.
I can walk that in here.
Correct.
So then once 8 o'clock on election night comes, then do you immediately start and say, I've got precinct X, now I can start counting these? Where normally, like Long Lake, we'd be waiting for the election judges to bring their ballots in here. So do you start counting the,
We actually, Mr. Chair, start counting them 7 days before the election right now. Under current law, we have 7 days prior to Election Day to begin processing absentee and mail ballots. And I'll be honest, 7 days is barely enough time for us to be able to get that. And that is one of the things that we've talked with legislators about. As the volume of people who chose to vote by absentee ballot or vote by mail is continuing to increase, that is pushing a lot of burden on election administrators to do that. Prepare for the polling place, because we're still getting materials and things ready for polling place voting. And voters can vote by absentee ballot up until 5 o'clock the day before Election Day. So we're continuing to serve voters at our counters, preparing for the polling place vote that's going to happen on Election Day, and trying to get the mail ballot and absentee piece in place. Everybody wants election results as quickly as possible. And if we don't start processing until 8 o'clock of those mail ballots, it's not going to happen on that same day. So we actually began processing absentee and mail ballots 7 days prior to Election Day. No results are tabulated prior to that. They're opened, they are fed into the tabulators, but we don't run any reports. We don't close the tabulators, so we don't have any way of knowing what any of the results are. We don't run any reports or have any data that would tell us what the results are until all of the ballots have been completed at that point. Mail ballots, we have until 8 o'clock on Election Day. Once those finals come through, then we generate those reports, and we don't have to wait for the polling place for those mail ballot precincts. We can report those results as soon as we're done.
and then if you remember, one year I was on the canvassing board and I had a whole series of questions that I asked you because I thought, you know, because you always hear of election fraud, and I asked, I'm not going to go through that whole series of questions, but I figured that in Minnesota, our election process is very sound, where people can't do fraud, you know, and vote several times. And then now when you say that when you're voting, you have to have a signature. So really, if the voter is pulling some funny business, then the person signing or vouching for
Witness.
that is also in trouble too. So I just find it fascinating. But I feel that Minnesota is very secure, that when I ask you all those questions. And I'm just amazed at how much you know. You are the election specialist.
I've been doing this for a while, Mr. Chair.
Exactly.
And you're right, our typical 15-minute canvas board was a 2-hour meeting, and I appreciated that because we did have the chance to talk about
Very
all those
inquisitive
different things.
person.
And it is a point of pride, I think, of election administrators across the state of Minnesota that we all are very cognizant of making sure that our elections stand up to the highest level of scrutiny that's possible. We are committed to election integrity. And the chain of command that is followed with whether it's a polling place voting situation or a mail balloting situation, there's no difference. There is still multiple steps and multiple checks and balances that are employed there. Even with mail balloting, we are still utilizing election judges of different political parties to process those mail ballots. So when those ballots are returned to our office, they are stamped, they are entered into the statewide voter registration system. We are required to bring in ballot board judges at least once every 5 days for the first month of voting, once every 3 days for the last 2 weeks of voting. And those judges, again, are working in pairs of different political parties. They're reviewing those envelopes to make sure that the signatures are complete, that the ballot is filled out, or the ballot envelope is filled out completely and correctly. And if it's not, if those 2 ballot board judges reject that ballot for any reason, we're required to send a replacement ballot to that voter with a letter telling them why their ballot was rejected. Here's a new ballot, please fill it out, or you can come into the courthouse and bring it in before 8 o'clock on Election Day. So there are multiple steps that we go through to make sure that happens.
Very good.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
if I might,
Commissioner Barros.
2 questions for you. First of all, as a witness, can an elected or a candidate witness that person filling out their ballot?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Barrows, no, they cannot.
Okay. Because
They
I
can't
ran
serve
into
as a
that when
witness
I
or
was-
as an agent.
When I was running. a lady asked me to witness hers, and I called down here, and I was told no. So just for clarification,
I'm not going to ask you to witness my ballot.
This year he could, as a candidate who is not on a ballot, he could. But, yes, if a candidate is a candidate on a particular ballot in that particular election, they cannot serve as a witness or as an agent for that particular voter.
and then my second question is, you mentioned the 7 days prior to. If it was all mail-in, would that 7 days, because now you're not setting up all those
Agreed.
sites outside the,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Barrows, if it was all mail ballot, we would still need to have additional time. 7 days, we can't feed 40,000 ballots through our equipment that quickly. And the other part that we're dealing with and talking about needing more time is we're fortunate that here in Crow Wing County, we have a little bit of extra space to do our elections process. You know, we've got the counter space for our voters who are coming in and voting. In many counties, what you see is the counter that's dealing with elections is also the counter that's dealing with tax payments, document transfers, vital records. They're all dealing with all of those same things in those locations. And having enough space to be able to socially distance our staff and those ballot board judges who would need to be processing all of those ballots, we would need to have additional time to make that occur as well, to
Okay.
work through that process.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deb, can you just tell how it works? Like I said, I just find this fascinating how this process works. But when, let's say, I don't mean to pick on Long Lake, it's the only thing or St. Matthias, let's just say St. Matthias. You do have the machine out there, and when you vote, you put your ballot in there, and then it's counted at that time,
Correct.
correct? And so when the election judges finish up and they get up here, you're just verifying the results of that
Correct.
machine, and then you're loading that into the Secretary of State's website, correct?
We're loading that in, Mr. Chair, and we're also adding the absentee ballots that have already been counted here centrally into that. So yes, the polling place judges are confirming and certifying the work that they did at the polling place. When they get here, we're verifying that their numbers match, their certification sheet matches what's on their tally tape, and then we're adding those absentee results that the other election judges have already done.
And then the absentee ballots do not stay here? Do they go to the polling place?
No,
How does-
absentee ballots do stay here.
They stay here?
Yes.
And then after 8 o'clock, then you run those through the
Correct.
machine? Oh, I see.
Correct.
Okay.
After 8 o'clock, we run the totals of the absentee ballots. They are not reported separately, but they have to be accounted for separately so that we can track that paper trail of everything that occurs there. We do not release results of a precinct until both the absentee precincts and the polling place results are all together and combined totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
A couple of other things that we are currently doing right now. We recently have reached out to all of our city and townships and told them these are some things that we think you should be thinking about, and these are things that we're doing as well. We train about 500 election judges every election cycle. And for most of them, I stand up in front of a room of 150 people and teach them. That's probably not going to be advisable in June of this year when I'm typically doing election judge training. So we are planning to have exclusively online training for our election judges this cycle. We have been using online training for our experienced election judges who have been judges in the past as a refresher training. We'll be modifying that presentation, modifying that training session so that we make sure we can catch all of our new judges as well. But our training will be conducted exclusively online. We are already preparing for a significant increase in mail balloting or absentee voting as well. We were seeing that more and more people were choosing to vote prior to Election Day. In 2018, we had, I want to say 25% of our voters here in Crow Wing County voted absentee prior to Election Day. For a presidential election, we were anticipating that was going to be closer to 30%. I'm now thinking it might even be closer to 40% if people are not willing to go or not wanting to go to a polling place. They may choose to vote by absentee ballot. So we are increasing our supplies, making sure that we have the supplies and equipment that we need to have for that particular purpose. We are also planning on how social distancing can be accommodating at our county facility here. I was just meeting with our facilities manager before I came upstairs, talking about how do we accommodate what we currently have set up on our second floor for our voting area. We will need to reduce the number of voting booths that we currently have available. We have 10 voting booths in there right now, but they're kind of shoulder to shoulder. They're only about this far apart. So we're going to probably be reducing the number of booths that we have, spreading those apart, probably limiting access to the number of people that we have in the building at one time. In 2018, we had a couple hundred people at our counter at one time during the last few days leading up to Election Day here to vote. So we would probably need to think of how we can accommodate that as well. We are asking cities and townships to think about their polling places and what accessibility issues or accommodations need to happen there for social distancing. And that's one of the things I wanted to bring to you today. As the county board, you are also the town board for unorganized territory. And I'm pretty confident in saying we're probably the only unorganized territory in the state that doesn't vote exclusively by mail. Most unorganized territories have a handful of population versus our third largest population center, like our unorganized territory is. So as the town board, you do have the authority to recommend that that township go exclusively to mail, if that was your choice. If you wanted to have those voters vote exclusively by mail for this election cycle, you could pass a resolution to do so. Right now, we have 3 precincts in unorganized territory, the red, the white, and the blue precinct. The blue precinct votes at the Church on the Wise Road. The white precinct votes at Living Word North Church on Highway 371, and the red precinct votes at Crowing Power. The red precinct in the Crowing Power building is our one that we have the greatest concern about at the moment because of the setup of that polling place. Voters go into the lobby, down the hall, around the corner, into the meeting room that they have that's also kind of doubles as their employee lunchroom as well. It's a very tight space to begin with, and there's usually lines down the hall and around the corner for that particular precinct. We have been in touch with Crowing Power. They are still willing to allow us to use their area as a polling place. However, they are recommending that we move to their warehouse rather than having that meeting room as the polling place for this cycle. Doing so will require that we have to purchase or rent bathroom facilities. We'll need to rent a porta potty facility and a hand washing station to have available for our election judges at that location. We may need to look at getting some fans for August. If it's really hot, we may need some air movement in there. We've already kind of talked about some signage things that we would have necessary for that particular area to allow for better distancing there. We've also heard from Living Word North. They're also willing to allow us to continue to use their building as a polling place as long as it's not still under a shutdown order by the state at that point in time. There is enough space in that building that we feel that there is enough space that we can distance things as need be for that particular purpose. We have not yet heard from the Church on the Wise Road, but again, there is enough space in that building, the way it's currently configured, that we are confident we could be able to provide distancing as needed there.
Deb, when does this decision have to be made
For the mail balloting part of it?
Mail balloting for the town board in unorganized territory?
So the law allows townships and cities to make their choice to move to mail balloting no less than 90 days prior to the next election. So that would be May 11th is when the decision has to be made, no later than that date.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Franzine.
Deb, I'm wondering, we do have the red, white, and blue. Could we just, red sounds like it's not a good idea at all. Could we just do one portion, or does it have to be all of unorganized?
Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, Commissioner Franzine, we could choose to just do one precinct of that township as mail balloting. Your resolution would basically just have to note that the precinct of red within the unorganized territory would be a mail ballot precinct. So it wouldn't have to be all or nothing because they are delineated by 3 separate precincts.
Deb, it sounds like you're moving forward with your election process, and the legislature is still in session. So, and being that I was there, I know how things happen in the last day or 2 days. Is there any possibility that they could say that it'll be all vote by mail this year?
Mr. Chair, I know that they are planning to hear another elections update in the House on Thursday. I've been asked to be available for comment and questions if necessary. There seems like there is a strong feeling that all vote by mail is not going to be palatable.
Okay.
The Senate has yet
Say palatable, does that mean not possible or not?
not a desire to want to move in that direction.
Oh, really? Okay.
Okay. There is conversation around allowing for vote centers, which is, I think, another key thing. We talk about red not being the best use of the facility at red. Could we combine red and white? Could we combine a couple of our precincts? Could we combine some of our areas that we know? One of the disadvantages of more people choosing to vote early by absentee ballot is a precinct that has 500 voters, if they have 30% of their population that's voting prior to election day. Now, while that maybe made sense to have those voters or those election judges there in a regular election, if more people are going to vote, if they see 50% of that population vote, you only have 250 people coming into that polling place. Could we combine some of these polling locations to say we have one polling location in Pequot Lakes that would serve the northern portion of the county, and one polling location in Crosby that would serve that portion of the county, and one down at St. Matthias that would serve that southern portion? Could we do that? And there's a reason why I really think vote centers are going to be critical. We aren't going to have enough election judges to be able to staff the 40 polling places that we have to staff in Crow Wing County. I thought when 2020 started that the presidential nomination primary was going to be the biggest challenge that we had to face in elections in 2020. And that's turning out to be a piece of cake at this point in time. We really struggled to find election judges for that March election because we had so many snowbirds who were gone and didn't want to come back to Minnesota for one day just to serve as an election judge. A great percentage of our election judges are at an at-risk population for contracting COVID-19. We already hear from some who are saying, I don't think I can be a judge this year. And if we aren't able to find enough election judges to fill all of our polling locations, that's going to be detrimental to our voters' experience as well. We actually believe we need more election judges because we're going to need to have additional people to assist with social distancing, with making sure that everything is wiped down. We're looking at how we can procure sanitizing products, PPE for our judges, making sure that we have both judges and voters' safety in mind at these polling places, which is why mail-in voting would be a really great solution if we could move to that model statewide. If we can't achieve that at a statewide level, having some flexibility to change some of these polling centers so that we could use more election judges in shifts or in different ways and accommodate voters differently. It may seem counterproductive to say a solution is to have fewer polling places, but if we pick the right polling places that have enough space that we can accommodate more spacing and utilizing those election judges, we could accommodate those voters in a better location that way.
The only thing is I want to, if that's the way we're going to go, we got to make sure that we have, even after hours, you know, let's say it's election day and it's at 6 o'clock and they call this county, somebody has to answer the phone, because if they go to St. Matthias and they go, I want to vote, but I can't vote here, because there's a lot of people that just will not know ahead of time.
You're right.
And they're going to be scrambling around, and they're going to, then you finally tell them where they need to go, and they're there at 5 minutes after 8.
Mr. Chair, I totally agree, and we always have our phones answered on election day up until we leave the building at way early the very next morning. So those phones would be answered. Part of what we're looking at is, how do we provide information to the citizens? What is our communications plan going to look like?
Yeah.
How do we procure single-use pens? You know, pens aren't really easy to sanitize on the fly. So one of the things we're looking at is, where do we find cheap enough pens that will work, that as you come in to vote, here's your pen, here's your, you know, your pen might be your I voted sticker this year. Who knows? We might be looking at, don't give us back the pen. We're going to have to wipe down everything every single time. And sanitizing products are getting much and much harder to find, and PPE is getting a lot harder and harder to find. The other issue that the legislature needs to take up is the federal legislation that the CARES Act also appropriated $400 million nationwide for election-related COVID relief. Minnesota's share of that is $4 million. In Minnesota, the legislature has to appropriate any funds that are received from the federal government to the Secretary of State's office to be used for elections purposes. So we need the legislature to act to be able to give access to those funds to the local levels of government, or to the Secretary of State's office, which we've also heard we will be partnering with them to receive some of those funds to help with some of these issues as well in procuring that equipment and supplies that will be needed.
So Deb, in looking at the calendar, we've got one more board meeting this month
Before May 11th.
before May 11th, and then the next board meeting in May is on May the 12th.
Exactly.
So we, board members, we do have to make a decision, well, we have to get a consensus today and then have the resolution at the next board meeting, so,
So that is my ask today, is if you are interested in considering mail balloting for unorganized territory, I will already tell you Dean Lake, your other unorganized territory, second assessment, already is mail balloting. They've been mail balloting since the very beginning. So
I personally think that we should go in the direction of just having all of unorganized territory mail balloting, but I first want to have Commissioner Franzine and Commissioner Brecken weigh in, because that is, even though we are the township for the town board for the entire unorganized, that is your district. So what do you think?
Well, I think in this situation, we probably need to go this way. 82% of unorganized is in my district.
Right.
And, you know, if things aren't looking up by then, we have to do this. I don't want this to be a permanent change just for this election.
And Mr. Chair, Commissioner Franzine, if I can add to that, the board can choose to adopt a resolution revoking mail balloting at any time after that election cycle. So yes, you can either set it into your resolution that says it's a one-time thing only for 2020 elections, or you can take another resolution in afterwards to revoke it.
I'd like to just put it in the resolution for right now.
And we can certainly do
Because
that.
we can then see how it works.
Agreed.
Because for you and I, it means a whole lot more than the rest of the board.
Right.
Commissioner Brecken?
Yeah. What would your recommendation be, Deb?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brecken, I would recommend that you consider voting by mail for this election cycle. I think that it will allow the voters confidence that their right to vote isn't going to be impacted by their health concerns or by other concerns that they may have about going to a crowded polling location. Red precinct is your precinct, which with accommodations from Crowing Power, we could make that change in that building for that particular purpose. But I will be honest that I was very concerned that that would be a detrimental factor to voters even wanting to exercise their right to vote, given the crowded space of what that polling place was.
That doesn't add, to me, it doesn't seem like a good alternative.
Correct.
So, yeah, I'll think about this, but I would be.
You can't do any research, I gotta know right now.
No, but I would be open. I would be open to going with the mail too. I can see the benefit of that, and especially at this time. And I very much appreciate your recommendation.
And before I go to Commissioner Barrows, so how would that work? So let's just say the election, I think, is on November 3rd.
It is.
When would they receive their ballot? What date? A month before?
So, Mr. Chair, ballots are sent out for mail ballot voters about 20 days prior to Election Day.
20 days.
So what we would do is we send a letter to all voters who are in a mail ballot precinct, letting them know exactly, here's when you can expect your ballot to be mailed out for the August primary election. Here's when you can expect your ballot to be mailed out for the November general election, so that they're watching their mailbox. That's another thing that we hear from people is, oh, you know, mail, that's not always secure, you know, the mailman. There are two things that those are valid concerns. And there are two things that I think that can help alleviate that. One is knowing that time frame. We posted on our website for those mail ballot precincts so they know that. It's posted at their official posting place, which in this case is the courthouse because it's unorganized territory. But for a township, it's posted at their township posting area as to when those ballots will be sent out. And they get an individual letter that's not just addressed to the household, it's addressed to each registered voter. Those voters will get that letter that says, here's when your ballot will be mailed out. The instructions will be included with it. If you have any questions, you can contact our office, and the courthouse is still a polling place for you on Election Day. The other part with the mail piece is the post office offers a service that's called Informed Delivery. It's free to sign up for. You can sign up for it, and you get a daily email that gives you an image of, this is what should be in your mailbox today. This is what's coming through the post office today that's coming to your mailbox today. And there's a little checkbox. If you don't get that piece of mail on that particular day, there's a little checkbox that you can click, and it triggers a tracking process, a ticket opened with the post office to find out where your mail is, basically. I've had that service myself personally for a couple of years since they offered it, just because I wanted to check it out to see how it works. And it actually is very, very accurate. I mean, there are very few times when if it says something's coming to me that I don't get it. And if I don't get it that day, I usually get it the next day. Typically, it is what is on my image in my email that morning is what is in my mailbox that afternoon. So that's the Informed Delivery Service. It's a free service from the post office. You just need to go to their website and sign up for it, put in your email address information, and then you get that daily email sent to you that shows what that is. That's a level of confidence that our voters can have, knowing that their ballot is supposed to come during this period of time. They can check that service and it says, oh yes, my ballot is supposed to be in my mailbox today.
Commissioner Barrows?
Mr. Chair, one quick question, Deb. This would also cover a potential primary in August also, correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Barrows, yes. This would be for the full election cycle. You cannot change polling places between a primary and a general in an election year, in an even year. So if we make the change to mail balloting, it would be for both the August primary as well as the November general election.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I would be in favor of this, going with Rosemary's suggestion, I'm sorry, Commissioner Franzine's suggestion of the one-year trial and see how it goes.
Okay. Deb, if you want to put together a resolution for us, I think you've got a consensus. Obviously, we don't make any motions or take any
Correct.
official action here, but I think you've got a consensus of the board. So if you could come forward with a resolution on that for the next county board meeting, that would be great.
I will put it together today.
Deb, one other question, what does it cost? What's the cost per voter in Crow Wing County? Do you?
I do have that
Oh, boy.
information. You're asking questions I love to know about. I will talk a little bit while I'm pulling up that data. I will talk a little bit about the cost of mail voting. And, mail voting, what we've done here historically in Crow Wing County, and I will consider that we would still continue to do, is that we charge the cost of mail voting only from the standpoint of the postage that is needed to send those ballots out and be returned back. The other part about mail voting is that it's postage paid, return mail, so that when the voters get their ballot, they don't have to find a stamp to put on it to send it back. It already comes pre-postage for them to return it. So we charge our cities and townships who choose to move to mail balloting. They are charged only for the postage that is actually incurred for the ballots that are sent out. All the other costs associated with it, the election judges, the ballot boards, the equipment, those are paid through our county elections budget, if you will, or from that cycle. It's taxpayer money, it's taxpayer money. We have a dedicated elections account here at the county. Previous boards have agreed with me on that standpoint, that going through the exercise of trying to prorate what that amount would be out to those precincts is not very cost effective or has a real good impact. So when we talk about the cost of a per ballot cost of elections, usually what we talk about is all of the supplies, materials, and the staffing or election judges that needs to go into accommodating an election. And in the general election in 2018, we had a cost per ballot of where's my, I pulled up the wrong spreadsheet. I apologize. Give me one more second.
Gave
No,
us
no,
this
that's okay.
information before.
I know, I gave it on the update. I just have to figure out where I saved that file, and I think I can pull it up quickly here.
Deb, is mail balloting less expensive than
I think it
election judges?
depends on how you look at how big your precinct is. Usually we say if you have about 500 registered voters in a precinct, that the amount of postage that's necessary probably covers 4 election judges, your cost of your utilities, some of the training aspects of things that go along with that. The other part of it is that Most precincts, if they are larger, need more election judges. 4 is the required minimum by state statute if you're using an optical scan system, that you have to have at least 4 election judges. Most of our precincts have anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10 judges, and more if they can accommodate so that they can allow for shift work to occur as well. With the mail balloting, there is a tipping point where it probably does cost a little bit more for mail balloting, but the trade-off of that is that you're not paying as many election judges
Right.
as what you had been in the past either, so.
But then if you really want to know where the people are at, and you're getting a larger
You're getting a larger set of turnout, if you will, if you look at it
turnout
that way.
to,
Right,
yeah, which I think
to
is a
absorb that
great thing.
cost. So in 2016, the last presidential election year, the state primary did not have a whole lot on the ballot at that year. The cost per ballot was $82.72 in the 2016 state primary. In the 2018 state primary, you recall we had a sheriff's race countywide on our ballot in 2018. So we had a higher turnout of people who voted in the primary election. The cost per ballot was $12.82 in the primary election in 2018. Obviously, turnout has a strong bearing on what cost per vote is or cost per ballot, because we're preparing an election based on expectations that no matter how many people turn out, we still have the same prep work that goes into that.
Yeah.
For this 2016 state general election, the last presidential year, the cost per ballot was $4.98. And in 2018, the cost per ballot was $5.37.
Interesting, okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Commissioner Barrows.
if I may, to follow up on that, if the entire county was mail-in, just speaking hypothetically, would the difference, you say it might be a little more expensive to do the mail-in, would it be material?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Barrows, if the entire county was mail-in, it would probably be less expensive, because we wouldn't have to prepare any of the polling place supplies, materials, and time that is necessary for that. We would utilize a number of election judges, but we wouldn't utilize all 500 election judges across the county, if that makes sense. So that cost would probably be slightly less if it was entirely mail ballot. When we're in a hybrid situation, then you compare a polling place to a mail balloting precinct, that's where you start to see, depending on the differences and the uniqueness of each polling place, where you would see some of those differences.
Right. Okay.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Franzine.
Are there any counties that are 100% mail-in
Um,
in Minnesota?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Franzine, I believe Coochin County is 100% mail ballot.
Correct.
That's the only one.
I think
Do
there
we-
may be one other, but I know Cooch is.
Okay, thank
Do
you.
we have the authority to do that as a county board, or?
Mr. Chair, no, you do not.
Do
The
not.
statute requires the townships to pass a resolution to move to mail balloting, or the cities to pass a resolution to move to mail balloting.
Okay. Deb, anything else?
Nothing
on your
further from
update?
me.
Any other questions from the county board? No. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb, very, very helpful. Jacob Free, proposed land use ordinance changes.
All right, I'm just gonna hand out the materials here real quick.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner
a-
Barrows.
just a quick remark. I saw on Facebook the other day, somebody posted it. They never thought they would see in their lifetime a time when they'd have to put a face mask on to go into a bank to get a withdrawal.
I was just thinking to save something that's right along that order. Yep.
So I'm going to be passing out a few items here.
think we got all the materials, Jake, so you can
Excellent.
go right ahead with your presentation. And, you know, if any of the commissioners or myself, we have any questions as you're going through, we'll just stop you at a certain point. Otherwise, with me, I'll probably forget my question. I guess I could write it down, but go ahead with your presentation.
All right, perfect. Mr. Chair and members of the board, good morning. What I have for you today is something that we started a while back in February. So we have hired a consultant with Hometown Planning. His name is Ben Olson. Normally, Ben would be on a phone call here, but due to the logistics of this room, he's listening in Alexandria. And so we have someone else taking kind of notes on anything that happens here today. But he's helping us facilitate a number of proposed changes to our land use ordinance. It was last amended in, I believe, November of 2017. So it's been a little bit of time. Always a good practice to make sure our land use ordinance is tip-top shape, up to date, and is in good working order. Just updates if there's any changes that we need. In February, we had a first staff meeting where we formulated just at the staff level what we were thinking of changes to the land use ordinances. Those changes come from either anecdotal feedback from the Board of Adjustments or Planning Commission based on some public hearings that we have where we say, you know what, we really need to take a look at this. This is kind of something that I don't see fits. So I make those notes and then kind of do a running tally of things we need to look at. Some of the things I have on there are things that come up based on things that I'm seeing at the staff level or language in the ordinance that the practice maybe isn't fitting what's in the ordinance, some of that stuff. And the third thing we think about is any feedback, whether it be official or anecdotally from the County Board of Commissioners, you folks, if we've gotten any feedback. And so we took that at a staff meeting in February and late, and we combined all those potential changes into this document that you see here, which is the big packet table. And so that's the one we're going to refer to. Now, there are total on those 21 pages of 60 proposed changes. We're not going to, my plan is to not go through line by line every single one of those changes, but to simply go through about 13 of them that I think may generate quite a bit of discussion or are significant enough that I at least wanted to make sure that I'm reading the temperature of our decision makers and getting some good, robust feedback before we take this to a bigger level process, which would be a public hearing, 30-day public comment period, notice to MPCA, DNR, a lot of different entities. I want to make sure we're not going backwards. So the plan here this morning is to really review a few of those changes, and I will walk those through kind of one by one. If there are other changes on here that you want to just pick out and say, hey, I know you weren't thinking of that, but I want to talk about this one, we can do that too. I will note our process moving forward. The goal on this entire process is to get the land use ordinance updated by early fall. So I think we're on track to do that, especially with coming here today. All right, so the first one I want to talk about, I'm going to refer to a couple different documents. So we're on page 1 of the packet table that you have in front of you, and that's called change number 1 in the very left-hand column. Do we have a laser pointer here today? Oh, is it? Oh, thank you very much. So I might have to do that when we get to the map section. So you might recall, Mr. Chair and members of the board, we had a discussion about a particular property, a Rudolph property on Pine Beach Road. And it might be good at this point, if we have the map, we can put it up on the screen. Otherwise, it's in front of you. So we're going to refer to the map packet as well. What you see in front of you is 3 pages of materials. The first one is just our land use map table that tells what each color means with the zoning. So the second one is a zoomed in area of Pine Beach Road as it exists in the county with the zoning in that area. And then the third, yep, sorry.
I'm just going to stop for a couple, just going to take, I should have did this before you started. We're just going to take like a 2-minute break. 3-minute
Absolutely.
break. So we'll just keep things running and take a break.
He's
perceptive.
I do believe it's still live streaming, just so you know. It's not recorded, but it's live. Thanks for the heads up.
Thanks for doing this, Jay. This took some time.
We're continuing to run. We don't need to start anything back up, do we?
The recording, it's just live streaming right now.
Okay. Okay, I think we're ready if you're ready.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, Jake, go ahead and start again.
All
Sorry
right.
about that.
All right, Mr. Chair and members of the board, one thing I failed to mention is we did have two separate meetings with our Board of Adjustment Planning Commission, April 8th and April 15th, where we took the proposed staff changes and ran that by the Board of Adjustment Planning Commission to see kind of the same format we're doing here, what they thought about it. And so we've built some consensus there on their feedback. That is in blue on the right-hand table, or on the right-hand column of the table. So I'll refer to that at the end of each item so you can see what their thoughts on these things were as well. All right, so getting back to change number one, this came from a recommendation from the county board to explore a wider land use change along Pine Beach Road. Pine Beach Road, just north of Red Sand Lake, west of Highway 371, just adjacent to the city of Baxter. The concept here would be to take a look at this road, which is about 3.4 miles all the way to the Cass County boundary, and look at the potential for commercial zoning adjacent to that road. We had also put down the preliminary, should we take a look at Gull Dam Road, but that was deemed to be out of scope at this time. We just wanted to take a look at that road. We had received just a number of land use map amendment changes, rezoning requests on there that I know have generated quite a bit of discussion on what we should do long-term. When we ran this concept by the Board of Adjustment Planning Commission, the consensus there was to, from this point here on the screen, which, as you can see, it's pink right when my laser is pointed, all the way east to Highway 371, so that's 1.5 miles approximately, to rezone either side of the road, north and south, on the adjacent properties to Commercial 2 zoning, all the way back, obviously not in the city, can't do that, and then leave the remainder portion west, which is about 1.9 miles, the way it is right now. That was the discussion that was had by the Planning Commission so far.
I would like to know, you said to that pink, what road, is that Carlson Road? And is that both sides of Carlson Road, or?
So
It's hard to say.
Yep,
see.
Carlson Road would be this one further to the west, right here. This is Wilderness Way, I believe, is the name of that road. I was actually just looking that up. So that is Wilderness Way. And so this pink zoning for Commercial 2 ends just to the west of that road.
And so just to get my bearings, so Carlson Road would be the road that you'd turn on to go to All Saints Catholic Church, correct?
Would be the road where Justin Rudolph is.
Correct.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Barrows.
if I might, how deep are you going? How far north and south of 77?
The discussion was just adjacent parcels, meaning
To the
parcels physically connected to the road. There was some discussion about an actual buffer that you would just set it no matter where the property lines are. Still obviously open for discussion on that, but the sort of the consensus was adjacent properties.
And why stop where they were? Why not go all the way to the county line?
Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Barrows, the discussion seemed to resonate that some of the changes that we've already seen in this area or the existing commercial uses seem to be concentrated east of this point. And there was concern at that discussion that there was a lot of residential development in this area, some new plats that were more residential in nature, and some concerns about how that might affect the balance of that use. At this point, they were open to moving west gradually in the future. But that seemed to be the general discussion point.
And let's remember
Mr. Chair.
that the Planning Commission is our appointees. Ultimately, we make the decision on what this will look like.
Right. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Again, going west from that line that the planning was looking at, now Carlson Road, right next, just to the west side of that is where the landscaping company was.
Correct.
Yes.
So this property right here is the conditional use permit that sort of, I would say, precipitated the.
And then from there, for there going west is pretty much residential, it looks like, on
Correct.
here. So what would it be to take it down to that point, which would have to be on the back side of that property? You know, where the property line behind that would be
Yeah,
going
mile
up?
circle.
Yeah, to include, I mean, if we're going to look at this, and we know that there's a commercial property already there, which now is non-conforming, which, I mean, if we extend it down there, they would be able to be in that commercial zone.
That is certainly something to consider. I will say that the use that they have now is able to operate as is. They have a conditional use permit for that specific use. So I would say what they're trying to do right now is being accomplished. But certainly if that's how the board feels, they want to go a little bit further.
Jake, I thought, and I don't know, you probably don't know the answer to this, but, you know, if you look right in here, before you get to the Rudolph property, I thought when I went out there, and Commissioner Hogan and I drove out there to look at that property, I thought right in here there was a close converse commercial property sign with property for sale. So I don't know if that property right in there is being offered up as commercial. Are you aware of that or not?
I am not aware of the nature of why it's for sale or how it's being advertised.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking that if that is the case, and I know I saw a sign out there, let's say that property is sold to some business, we're gonna be right back here again, you know, with either a conditional use permit or something. So that's just something food for thought.
And so it would be good, Mr. Chair and member of the board, it would be good to sort of, if we can, build some consensus of a direction so that we can take a look at that. And so I don't know if there was more of a,
Do you want a consensus on that, where we think that the cutoff should be?
Yeah, a little bit of, I think, direction.
I actually think it needs to be where that Carlson Road or where all the way to the Rudolph property is what I think it needs to be.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
If I could just
Commissioner
bring up one more
Barros.
issue, is there's a lot of variation in, you say, the adjacent properties. So there's a lot of variation in the depth. And to point out, the one piece of property where Rudolph's property is, if you go to the other side of the lake there, you look at that one piece, goes significantly further north than some of those. So we're not, at this point, discussing how deep we want to go on each side of 77. And I think it has a real bearing because we're going to have a jagged line running through there. And for purposes of continuity, it would be, and I'll just throw out, if you said 40 acres, either side. I don't know if there's even 40 acres between 77 and Red Sand on some of those points, but if you come up with some acreage, then it's consistent as a forget what I'm trying to say, but it's consistent throughout the whole district then. Just a thought.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair and members of the board, one of the things to consider is if there was some sort of, let's say, arbitrary buffer. When we have properties that are 75% zoned this and 25% zoned this, you know, it's just kind of the arc of the zoning. If it's more than 50% of that zoning color, that's what the zoning of the property would be.
Okay.
Just something to think about.
So, okay, so this is another question. So, okay, so let's just say that parcel right there, let's say that parcel, we had that be commercial, but let's say they owned the little sliver back here and they needed that to be part of their business. What would we do there? If the adjacent parcel is, if the first parcel is commercial and the next one is not, then they come to us and they said, well, I need this whole outline for my business. How would we look at that?
Well, we could look at a consolidation of those lots.
Okay.
And then at that point, you know, if it's, you know, at that point under consolidation, we would look at how that would be zoned with the parcel as a whole.
Oh, okay.
So there's ways to handle that
Okay,
through the office.
okay. Go ahead and keep going, Jake, with you.
Okay, we'll, so just to consolidate what I heard a little bit, is the board maybe wants to see perhaps a little bit further to the west as a consideration?
Yes.
And perhaps look at, instead of the properties, I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, look at a width distance rather than just the properties.
Yep.
Okay.
And my idea, and I don't know whether this has been mentioned, but I don't think that the south side needs to be commercial as far down because it isn't commercial past Dan Sod right now. I
Okay.
don't know that there's anything commercial past there, but the other side has got commercial mixed in. So I think we need to go to the last commercial property, which is Rudolph's.
The only thing is, Rosemary, is I think that as, you know, trying to look out 5, 10 years
And that's
down the
what
road.
I'm looking.
You know, because here's an example, is, okay, so you know where Century 21 is? I can remember how it used to be when you go, when Paul Bunyan was out there, and then there was an A&W, the drive-in, and then Wells was out there, which was a mess. And
Which is
there
where
was,
Arby's was,
there
too.
was virtually nothing out there, and everything has grown up around that. And if you remember that little house and I don't even think it's there anymore, right next to the Hirschfield Paints and Century 21.
Tore down.
You know, yeah, it's tore down. So I'm thinking that as time goes by and more businesses, hopefully, want to come here to our beautiful community, and they might be buying a house to tear down to put a business in. So even if it is, you know, along that corridor, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, and I know that just because it's zoned commercial doesn't mean that you need to use it as commercial, and you aren't charged for commercial unless you're using it as commercial. But what I was thinking also, and I know that Baxter doesn't like to annex real often, but I assume at some point Baxter will annex up to the Pine Beach Road and not north of it. I mean, it has been looked at.
Commissioner Franzine, and
Commissioner
thank
Barris.
you, Commissioner. There were discussions at one point of going 40 acres north of 77.
Oh, 40 acres north, I didn't realize that.
And that would be to protect a commercial zone on both sides of the street, because we do have one road, Woida, where the county owns one half and the city owns the other half, when you get to the western part of Woida. And that just doesn't work well for maintaining roads and that. So to be consistent with a commercial district, that was the rationale to look at, if that were a possibility, to go 40 acres north of 77.
Well, that changed between the years that you and I were there then.
Sure.
All right.
Got a consensus on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, we'll take a look at that. Next item is change number 6. So we're going to flip to that point. This is a consideration to utilize a tool that was afforded to counties 5-6 years ago. So the existing concept for extractive use, conditional use permits, or extractive use operations, which would be gravel pits, peat mining, things like that, is a conditional use permit. For many, many years, cities have been afforded by statute the opportunity to use what's called an interim use permit, which means you could put deadlines or sunsets on uses and approve those uses, but have it expire or set it that it could only be used until something is used up, quantities or timelines. The way it currently is constructed in our ordinance is we don't have interim use permits. We have conditional use permits. They don't expire per se. So you can't condition that the extractive use shall end in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So we don't have that tool available to us. The state did allow counties to look at interim use permits 5-6 years ago. So the concept proposed here is to, just for extractive uses, so gravel pits, things like that, to change those into an interim use permit. So it's the same thing as a conditional use permit, except with the provision that if the board wanted to, the Board of Adjustments, they could put on a end date to that, say approval with subject to a 20-year timeline, and they would need to come back to get renewed or to re-up their CUP. They could make that as long as they want, as short as they want. They could do it by when that aggregate has been exhausted, they need to come back. There's a number of different ways to do it.
What's the reasoning for looking at this? I mean, this isn't making it more restrictive to have a gravel pit, is it?
No, it's just, I've looked at it as another tool in the tool chest for decision makers, where if they wanted to, not every time, but if they wanted to and they had concerns about a specific gravel operation, maybe in a particularly sensitive area, where there was a concern about timelines, where they could offer that tool up to say, you know, we agree with this conceptually, we have some concerns about the timeline or the amount of aggregate, we'll approve it, but with the condition of X number of years, we want to see that renewed. So in that respect, it's not a tool that has to be used, but it's available to them, just for extractive uses.
Okay, I'm a little hesitant on this. I don't know if, you know, I know that people don't like, you know, they go, I don't want a gravel pit next to me. But you know, I hate to tell you this, but we can't build roads without gravel pits. And we, the county taxpayers, get some pretty good, I think, bids in because one of our main local contractor has pits strategically located throughout the county where they can go in there and they can, you know, extract the materials that they need. They can put their plant in there to make asphalt. And if this is going to be, you know, something that's going to be more of a restriction on them, I'm hesitant to do that. That would, you know, so if the planning commission would put restrictions on there, the county board still has the ultimate say on that, correct?
Well, on an interim use permit or a conditional use permit, the Board of Adjustment right now has the final say. Only plats and rezoning, and ordinance changes go to the county board.
If the elected people don't have a say in it or control over that, I don't support that.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is not created yet, and I'd rather not create it. I mean, there's many concerns listed, and I think having the conditional use permit is enough. We don't need more government and more things.
Okay.
Commissioner Barros.
Mr. Chair, if I might, just to bring up a discussion about IUPs. They can be, and let's use the example of annexation. And so let's say that Baxter would annex a piece of property that has a CUP for a pit in it, and it's right in the middle of a potential residential development. Because it's a CUP, it follows the property. IUPs could be one of the conditions that it follows the owner of that property, and when that exchanges hands, it would end that particular use of that piece of property, correct?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a number of years. It could be a number of different conditions.
Right. So in thinking in those terms, you know, and there's many cities within our county that potentially that could happen. Generally, those sand pits are well located, and it's, you know, that is the upside of where they are located. So I don't know that that's a big issue, but I just wanted to bring that up, that, you know, there's a lot of conditions you can put on an IUP that you can't put on a CUP. Right. And make it more of a temporary thing, but it still can be long-term. And as an example, when I was on the city council in Baxter, I moved an IUP for a piece of property in the southwest corner of this city because it won't be developed potentially for a long time because there aren't public services out there, for the person to raise emus out there. But when it changes hands, the ownership of that property, that IUP will sunset at that point. So there are some times when an IUP really has some value. So I just bring that up for a point to make.
You know, Mr. Chair, there's two actual pits that I'm thinking of. One is obviously in Cass County with City of Lakeshore, but that one is now being tapped, as I understand, doesn't have much fill left in it to be able to use. So I think I know the city of Lakeshore is kind of looking at that as possibly, you know, getting that back, maybe for some, development in the future. And then there's a gentleman that has a property just south of, I believe, the Gull Dam Road, and there was an old sand gravel pit. And I don't know what his future plans for that property is. So, I mean, there's some things there that we'd want to kind of look into to see what the potential are for those uses that are expired gravel pits too.
Wow.
So I got to kind of think that through a little bit in my head.
I just know that down in the Twin Cities and around the suburbs there, that as things grew up, pretty soon the gravel pits were pushed out.
Right.
And there's no aggregate, and there was a shortage of aggregate, and then if you are hauling it in a long ways from out, and it becomes very expensive, and so gravel pits just have to be a part of, unless we want to.
Makes road building much more
Yeah,
expensive. if we don't have
exactly.
them.
So you're on page 2, number 6, is that what you're,
Yes.
okay.
Yep, and lastly, Mr. Chair and members of the board, I know there was concern by the Board of Adjustments about, well, if we move to IOP, do we have to put timelines every time? Or can we just handle it on a case-by-case basis if we feel there's a need for it? And the answer was, if you feel there's a need for it. I think that was more palatable for them to say, okay, it's a tool if we want it. I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but
And
I-
it says you're checking with Scott Anderson. Have you received a reply from him yet?
let's see. We have not. That came up on the 15th, so it's been pretty quick. So we'll check in with Scott.
Well, I would want his opinion before I make any decision.
Absolutely.
And,
Okay.
I can't stress enough too, though, that even though I have lots and lots of confidence in my appointee, and I'm sure the rest of the commissioners have confidence in their appointee, but ultimately, we're elected, I just want to make sure that we're not, we have to answer to our constituents, so I don't want to take away our ability to have a vote on that. I don't want to all of a sudden blame, say, well, it's the planning commission did it. Well, they're appointed by us, so
Right.
I'm just concerned about that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, we'll move on then to number 8. Shouldn't be too much discussion on this one. Right now, when there is a split that occurs, we call it administrative subdivision. They have they have 90 days to file a deed from the date of the approved split. We are proposing to change that to a year, and then with a written application, even extend that another 120 days, just to give folks that split property enough time to find buyers, tax considerations, things like that. All right?
Yep.
We'll move on then. Number 10. This isn't that big of a change, but it is sort of a newer concept. We do have more solar panels that are going up in the county. At some point, we'll have to handle an ordinance change to deal with the larger ones, the solar farms. But right now, the proposal is just to make sure that we handle the individual solar collectors and make sure that those get permits if they're in the ground, and they don't need permits if they're flush with the roof. We don't address any of that in the ordinance right now. A number of many other counties do. It is a more popular item. We are seeing them, and we just want to make sure it's overtly addressed in the ordinance.
So if this is a large, do we define what large is and what's, do we define that, or?
We have a section in our ordinance that defines if it's by kilowatts, if it's this big, it's going to be a CUP, and that's clearly a energy conversion thing. If it's less than that, then each one of the panels gets handled as a structure with standards. So this proposal is to handle those smaller ones.
Okay. So for example, I'm on the airport commission, we have been talking about, in partnership with somebody of putting, because there's a lot of room out there, putting in a solar panel
Yep.
array, so that would need a permit.
Well, something like that, if it's kind of the energy conversion system, a larger area, that's going to require a conditional use permit in our ordinance, depending on how much wattage is being generated. So it'll be a good discussion point with the airport about what's happening there.
Okay. So we just want to make sure, so you just want to make sure that if there's an 80-acre field and then there, all of a sudden, the whole thing's filled with solar panels, and we have nothing to say about it. That's what we're trying to do.
We do have a section in our ordinance that says you do need a conditional use permit for those larger areas.
Okay.
We don't have standards for it, just conditional use permit. But this is more getting at those, I need 2, 3, 4 solar panels in my yard, more residential type of power. We don't really
Somebody's
address
going to put
those.
it on their roof, they don't need a permit.
The proposal is just to say you can have that on your roof with no permits so long as it's flush with the roof and a couple other standards. Yep.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to number 11. So one of the things that's come up lately is duplexes in rural residential areas. So how our current ordinance is constructed is in rural residential areas, you're allowed one primary dwelling and then a guest cottage of up to 900 square feet in size. The popularity of duplexes, I think I've seen has increased. And right now the process is if you have a primary dwelling and then a second one that's over 900 square feet, that's a density variance. You'd need to go to the Board of Adjustments to get a variance to have 2 basically houses instead of 1. The proposal here is to state that if you want a duplex connected with a wall, meaning not just 2 homes, but connected with that central wall, you would be able to have that with just an over-the-counter permit as long as the property size meets the minimum zoning. What that means is if you're zoned rural residential 2.5 and you have a 3-acre parcel, you would be allowed 1 duplex on the parcel, not have to go to the Board of Adjustments. However, if you're zoned RR 2.5 and the existing acreage is, let's say, 1 acre, that wouldn't meet the minimum acreage size for a duplex still. So there is, what we're suggesting or proposing is to say, let's allow duplexes without a public hearing as long as it's at least the same size as the zoning. And so the consensus on the board was that we think that makes sense. Or
What if you had 3 lots that are all together and it's in a plat, there's 3 lots, and that you've combined them or consolidated it, how many duplexes could I have on that?
So what you're looking at there is a residential development standards. It's a different article in our land use ordinance, and we'd look at that in a different section. There's a factor in our ordinance we use to determine how many duplexes you can have for that type of situation, where it's more of the idea is a residential development, cluster development kind of an idea. This would be more individual properties who say, hey, I just want to put a duplex here.
So it could be a husband and wife, but they're elderly parents. They want to build a duplex and have mom and dad live right next door, in a way, I mean.
Yep, or we've had just small-time developers that have said, you know, I've got this property I bought here, and I just want to rent that out, and I just want to have a duplex. And right now, the conversation has been, well, you know, unfortunately, you got to get a variance, and the feedback has been a variance for just a duplex. And so we've looked at what's reasonable.
Yeah, okay.
So, go ahead.
Commissioner
Chair,
Barrows?
one quick question. So if you have an existing building and say you were going to add to it to make it a duplex, then the septic and drain field all have to be upgraded to accommodate that, correct?
Always, yep.
Okay.
We'd always be looking at that.
So would a duplex, under this ordinance, would a duplex be, could you have 1 septic system for the duplex
Yes, you could have a centralized septic system handling both of them.
and 1 well?
I believe so,
Okay.
although that's regulated by the state. I don't
Okay.
want to speak out of turn.
Okay.
So,
Next.
So, all right, so the next concept under duplex and triplexes is, in the Shoreland District, there is something called the Minnesota Shoreland Rules, which governs at a broad level all of the shoreland rules in the state of Minnesota, anything in the Shoreland District. The shoreland rules of the state of Minnesota does allow for triplexes in the Shoreland District if it meets a minimum lot size and width. However, our ordinance allows duplexes in the Shoreland District, but does not address triplexes, even though it's allowed by the Minnesota Shoreland rules. The proposal here is in the Shoreland District to allow triplexes without going through a variance if it meets the minimum sizes exactly like the Minnesota Shoreland rules allows for. So that's another item for discussion here as well.
I think it's smart to make our rules mirror theirs.
Okay.
I would agree. I think
Okay.
it should be consistent.
I will keep it moving then here. We're on number 13 now. That proposed concept is initially the concept was to say, okay, so you get one primary dwelling and then a guest cottage, but if someone wanted to bring up a travel trailer, less than 400 square feet in size, travel ready, and have it on the property year round, the concept was, would we allow 1, 2, or 3 of those to be on the property for more than 14 days, in addition to a guest quarters, in addition to a house, and not count against your dwelling unit maximum? This proposal, when we ran that by the Board of Adjustment, I would say was not met favorably. They still want to see travel trailers placed on a property for more than 14 days handled as an additional dwelling unit, meaning that counts against the number of maximum dwelling units you can have on a lot. So I bring that before you today to see if you want to address any considerations for folks that have travel trailers for more than 14 days. Do you want to see that exempt from taking away from their guest cottage limits or a dwelling unit, or keep the way we have it right now, which is if you choose to have a travel trailer, that's going to count against your dwelling unit count?
So I guess I'm not, so right now, okay, so I go better by stories. Okay, so I have a house and I have a travel trailer that my kids come and stay in for in the summertime. So if I said I want to build a kind of a guest cottage, I can't now because that travel trailer is considered the guest cottage?
Yes, as long as the travel trailer is there for more than 14 days, it flips it from a temporary structure to counting against. So if you have, yeah.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with having that count as,
Mr. Chair, if I can.
Yeah.
Was this Arrowhead Lake kind of an issue like this where they were bringing in those trailers for extended period of times on that property?
Well,
Is that similar?
that every one of these issues, there's always a moment where this comes up. I would say that's probably the moment where we asked a legal opinion of our counsel. Prior to that, I would say we were handling travel trailers as not being a dwelling unit, but our legal counsel said that's not what your ordinance says. If that's something you want to do or continue to do, you need to make sure that's an overt change, because that's a legal issue we're not going to have some success on. So,
so I guess I'm not following this. So if I have a travel trailer and I have it in my driveway for more than 14, it's my travel trailer. So it's counted against me as if I wanted to build a guest cottage?
if you're just storing it, and I know that's difficult to parse out. How do you know if it's being stored, if it's being used? We would have to get probably some reports of clearly there's a lot of use there. But if you're just storing something, that's not a problem. But if it's being used for more than 14 days, right now we have to call that a dwelling unit. If you would like to see that changed to allow some consideration for 1, 2, or 3, that's something we would need to address through the ordinance. Then, like I said, the Board of Adjustments felt they wanted to see that still handled as part of their dwelling units.
Commissioner Barros?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jake, how do we know when that 14 days starts?
You know, it can be difficult at times. We have to rely on either photo evidence or witnesses or things like that. So it's a difficult spot.
So what you're, okay, go
Sorry.
ahead. Go
Well,
ahead.
I just see that as a weak spot. Now, to the issue that Commissioner Brecken brought up, I think it should count against it because they're just coming in and asking for forgiveness after the fact, and you could park a half a dozen on a place. And, for instance, you could have a big family reunion for a month. I'm being facetious here, but just say that you did, and say 14 relatives all come with their travel trailers and they park them there. I see that as a problem. But the biggest problem is nobody knows when those 14 days start and when they end. And so enforcement of that is pretty difficult. But I agree, I probably disagree with you, Mr. Chair. I think it should be counted against it to have some type of control. I'm just concerned about how we discover whether that they're violating the 14-day rule.
So just to be clear, the discussion right now isn't whether we should get rid of the temporary 14-day thing, but more of after 14 days, do you want to make sure those are regular? I wanted to make sure there was no confusion about that. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Well, I guess this probably has come about because of all of my issues in my district. I mean, I've always got someone complaining, well, not always, but quite frequently I've had people call because they've got people who set up a trailer. They leave it there all year long. They use it all summer long. So it is a residence. And they put it over the property line. We've had that happen. And, you know, it needs to be regulated. If people are using it as a residence or a guest cottage, then it's a guest cottage. If you're just storing your own, that's a whole different story, and we're not dealing with that. You know, when they've got electricity running into it, and it's there all the time, it's a guest cottage, no matter what the outside looks like.
Correct.
I don't know how it can be a guest cottage when it's on wheels. I mean, it's a mobile, your license, they have to buy a license for it. I mean,
I don't think they're doing that either. They're
Well-
setting it there, and it's being used as a cottage.
well, I don't agree with you, so.
All right. Well, I'm just reading the temperature a little bit.
I know.
Mixed
And-
reviews,
and
mixed
when
reviews.
When we
Yeah.
go all the way through this, I mean, if you're gonna say, well, I wanna move forward at the next board meeting, I'd say no, because I need to go home and read this thoroughly again, so I'm not gonna be ready at the next board meeting to say, okay, let's hold a public hearing, just so, you know, unless three of you object to that, if you wanna take it up at the next board meeting, but I think I need to do like Commissioner Brecken, and I need to do a lot of research on this, so I can understand it better. Go ahead, Jake.
Okay, we will move on then to number 17, which is guest cottages and guest quarters, sort of dovetailing onto that discussion a little bit. So the way our language reads right now is a guest cottage, which is a standalone unit specifically for living purposes. Our ordinance says it must be 700 square feet, so footprint. But if you have a guest quarters, which is a livable area attached to, for example, a garage or the second story of a garage, that needs to be 700 square feet of livable area. So the two don't speak to each other very well. The proposal here is to state both a guest cottage and a guest quarters. The total area that's livable must be 700 square feet or less. So what does that mean? If I have a 2-story guest cottage, it would be, and the first floor is 600 square feet, and the second floor is 400 square feet, the total would blow over the 700 square feet. So this really gets at the being consistent with sort of what the intent of a guest cottage was, which was how much of it is being lived in. So the proposal here is to take the 700 square feet and change in a guest cottage and change that to 700 square feet of livable area.
So if it's a garage down below, obviously that's not livable.
Right.
You're talking about 700 square feet up above the garage,
And
or less.
that's correct. And we already have that provision for our guest quarters. But if it's just a standalone building for total guest cottage use, that would sort of limit the ability to have that basement underneath or a second floor. We would add those up.
Okay. Commissioner Franzine.
Well, it says within the shoreline district is 700 square feet, and this is our existing. And the outside the shoreline is 900 square feet.
Right.
I'd like to make those consistent. And I don't understand why, if we allow up to 30-foot maximum, why we can't have the 700-foot footprint and use both levels. I mean, why would you want a 30-foot building that you can't use both levels?
So just to clarify the distinction there, if it's a guest quarters, for example, on top of a garage, the maximum height of the structure can be 30 feet. If it's a guest cottage, meaning a standalone livable area, the maximum height is 15. Yeah,
Okay,
so there's a
I
bit.
see the difference
Yep.
now.
Mhm.
I still would like things to be consistent so that we don't have to look at the rules, we know them. Well, is this one the 15 or is this the 30?
Yep. No, so it sounds like you're kind of questioning some of the height differences there.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure I agree with it.
I don't understand what you're talking about, Rosemary. What do you mean? Give me an example.
Well, right now, for a guest quarter, you can have 700 square feet, but it can be 30 feet high. Why wouldn't you be able to have 2 floors and use 1,400 feet if you can have a 30-foot high building? But that's because it's above a garage, is what he just
Yeah.
explained to me, where if it's just one level, then it's only 15 feet.
And there's a lot of people, you know,
Yeah.
that live
Yeah,
around the
I
lake.
understand
They'll build a
it better
garage
now.
and they'll have a.
I was reading it literally the way it says, and it doesn't include the explanation he gave.
Yeah, the real big concept here would be just, do you want to see square footage for guest cottages, or do you want to start adding up those individual floors to make sure the livable area is, because right now, as long as it's less than 15 feet high, if they want to have a basement and a main level, I'm only looking at the footprint. They could technically inside have more than that, and I just want to see if there's any,
I'd like to just look at the footprint.
okay.
I don't know how anybody else feels.
So explain that to me, Rosemary, just a little bit.
Like the footprint is
Just the
700 square
footings.
feet, yeah.
And so you're basically one level, each level would be counted separately.
Yeah,
So what if I built a 700 square foot footprint, 15 feet was my height, right? So I have an 8-foot ceiling, and then I have a loft.
I don't see a problem with
Right.
Then that violates the.
Right
seven-
now,
seven-
we're only looking at square footage, so we wouldn't be adding up those livable area.
that. Want it to stay
Oh,
that way.
okay.
So the proposal that the board kind of reaffirmed, or the Board of Adjustments, was let's move to that livable area consideration, but I'm throwing that out to see if that's,
I just want to leave it, the footprint,
okay.
because I don't think that lofts should be, you know, that you have to put the footprint down to 400 square feet so you can have a loft.
Right. I'm okay with that.
Okay. Okay, we will move on again. We are on number 18.
1 second, Jake.
Oh, sorry.
The chair looks confused.
I
I
apologize.
still don't understand what we're doing. Okay, so what is, just tell me what the proposed change is. What are you, from what we're doing now, the proposed change? Just try to run.
Yeah, the proposed change is to actually be a little bit more consistent with our language between guest quarters and guest cottage by saying both of them are going to be livable area square footage maximums instead of the guest cottage.
So you
Yep.
gotta stop right there. So cottage would be just sitting there, it wouldn't be a apartment up above. That would-
Correct.
That's what you call a cottage?
Yep.
And the other one is what?
That would be your, typically probably what you've seen, where you've got the garage and a thing above it, livable area above it. Yep.
Okay. So your proposed change is saying that it's just getting it consistent where it be 700 square feet, whether it's the cottage or the apartment above the garage?
Livable area, yep.
It's,
Well, that makes sense.
it's going to be impossible to enforce. Who's got a 700-foot, a square-foot garage? If you're going to have a living quarter above that garage, it's going to be the size of the garage.
Mr. Chair, I think there's one in Lake Shore, that's a 700, bigger than a 700-foot square garage, right on 77, so. Some people do have the means to build those kind of buildings, but pretty rare.
I guess,
It's okay if we don't have a lot of consensus right now, at least we're digesting it.
well, let's just go forward, and otherwise we're never going to get through this.
Right.
Just keep going and.
Okay, so the next one is pools. Right now, we restrict the size of pools to 400 square feet in the rear lot zone. Basically, we just restrict the size of pools to 400 square feet. The proposal here is to say if it's behind the building setback, so on most lakes, 75 feet, we're not going to care about the size of pools anymore, as long as it meets the impervious maximums, but we would limit it to 400 square feet if it's inside that restricted zone of 75 feet from the lake, for example. Hearing no feedback, we'll keep going. We'll keep going. All right. So the next one is, we are going to number 27. This is clarifying that you can have
Let me stop you there. So looks like you're skipping along. Are you going to the more controversial ones, or why are you skipping over? I mean, you're not going through every single one.
Right, I'm just trying to, given the time consideration, going to the ones that I feel are going to generate a little bit more discussion or significant, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So number 27 is agricultural storage buildings. The way our ordinance reads right now, it states that you can be exempt from the height requirements of 35 feet, meaning go taller for agricultural buildings, but only in the ag district. The proposal here is to clarify that, to say that if it's actually being used as an agricultural silo or barn, even if it's not in the ag district, could be real residential 2.5, we're going to go ahead and let that happen, but not in the shoreline district.
Being that I know nothing about farming, I think that it sounds okay to let them have a silo, whatever size they need. I mean,
Even if it's not zoned ag, it could be rural residential 5. Yep, that's the proposal.
I think so, but I'm not 100% sure because like I said, I know nothing about farming. How big does a silo need to be to make it usable?
Right. The planning commission's feedback on this was that seemed to make sense.
Yeah, it sounds good to me, but
Yeah.
Okay. Should I wait for the chair? I don't want to move too fast if we need to wait.
he's probably the only one who knows about farming. You're the vice chair, what do you want to do?
Move ahead.
Okay. The next change proposal is number 41. We've only got 4 more to go here, so we're really getting close. Number 41 is a significant change. We require compliance inspections for septic systems anytime any permit is pulled with the county, and property transfers and splits. The proposal here is to say, we will not require a compliance inspection if a permit is pulled outside of the shoreline district for a non-septic dependent item, meaning a shed, a solar panel, things like that, a deck. If it's not a new house or an addition of a house that involves a bedroom outside the shoreline district, we're not going to require compliance inspections. So that's the proposed change.
Go ahead, you're in charge, I gotta take this call here.
Okay. I'm okay with that, as long as it's an accessory building without bedroom space. And trying to think if you had additional bathrooms, are we including that? Because that could
Yeah,
add
so
additional stress to it.
we have here, I want to make sure I read it right. Accessory structures that do not generate sewage. So if you have a bathroom and a garage, we're going to
Yep.
kick that in. A re-roof permit and a deck either uncovered or covered. We're saying we want to move away from the compliance inspection.
I'm comfortable with that.
That makes some sense.
Okay.
You okay, Rosemary?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering how often we do require inspection.
A compliance inspection?
Yeah, for septics.
So the requirements right now are every 3 years. I'm sorry, if you're pulling a permit, as long as your septic has been inspected in the last 3 years, or it's within 5 years of a new install, we don't need it checked again.
Okay,
So does that kind of help answer?
yeah,
Yep,
Okay.
thank you.
yeah, so do we have a list where we keep track of who's turned in their compliance inspections?
We keep track of all of that. It's actually on our interactive map. You can click on it, you can find it yourself. Anybody can kind of check those things. We have a list, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, the next one, third to the last item here is number 52. This is changing the definition of our commercial storage building. This, technically, our definition of a commercial storage building says that it's for contractors and service industries to store their stuff for what they do. The proposed here is to change it so that a commercial storage building is actually for the general public to store their things, like most folks actually want to use their commercial storage buildings. There's a little bit of a conflict here on what technically our ordinance says versus what we intended it to be for, so we want to make sure we address that. Any questions or concerns about that?
Any questions on that one? So Jake, so this, what these proposed changes are changes, a combination of changes by your department and Scott Anderson, who's our attorney that is helping us with this stuff. He's an expert in this area. These are proposed changes that you and your department felt like you needed to change, and then also with Scott, is that correct?
So I would say there's, Mr. Chair and members of the board, there's really 3 areas that we looked at. One was things I saw just from my own day-to-day that what we're doing isn't matching what it says. Let's get that addressed at kind of a staff level.
Clarification.
Yep. 2 is through applications that have come through, and then I speak with the Board of Adjustments, and it's quite clear that we keep seeing these, for example, duplexes coming back. You know, I think we should take a look at that. So I write it down, and that's another thing. And the third way is, for example, this Pine Beach Road issue is from what I hear from the board. So
Yeah.
I'd say it's really those 3 areas.
And so really, if somebody's watching this and saying, oh my God, here comes some more rules and regulations, that isn't necessarily the case. This is more of trying to clean up and make it more clear, I would think. Part of it is that, more clarity for people and making it more consistent, wouldn't you think?
Certainly, much of this is matching the practice to our ordinance, which is necessary. And we did seek Scott's counsel on many of those things where, hey, we've been doing this for 20 years, but then Scott would say, well, that's not what your ordinance says. So cleaning that up.
Okay.
And then we also, we do have some changes here, like the interim use permit, which came about as an opportunity that, would be a different rule. It would be different than a clarification.
Yeah.
So there's a few of those.
Well, I'm one personally that I don't want to get carried away with, restricting people, what, I mean, I can understand within reason, but I don't want to get carried away. And I just want to make the public be assured that we're not going crazy on rules. It's more of kind of I consider this more of, when we talked about it before, of a kind of a cleanup and clarification process in a way. Jake, are you done?
Well, I did have 2 more.
Okay, go ahead.
But I'll be as fast as I can here.
No, we're here we got all kinds of time.
Okay, no problem. So we just got done talking about commercial storage buildings. Doesn't sound like there was a lot of feedback there, so we'll continue to effort that. Next one is fees for violations. So the concept there is right now, and this is something we do, just to clarify, we do need to check with our legal counsel on our ability to administrate fees or implement them and how legal that is to do. But theoretically, if it is legal, the proposal would be to say, if you're in violation of the land use ordinance and we provide internally, let's for example say a 30-day deadline to fix an issue, we wouldn't do any administrative fees. We would just set the deadline, we'd work with the landowner. But if we reach a situation where there's clearly not a hardship and there's just non-compliance, not meeting our deadlines, we would move to a system of saying, so after that's not being met, we're gonna assess a fee per day of this violation, in addition to perhaps taking it over to our attorney's office for further civil or criminal penalties, is to sort of add a little bit more of an incentive to say, we really think it's important that this issue's not getting fixed. We've given for example, 30-day deadline. We haven't heard any contact from you. We're really concerned about this. At this point, we're going to administrate a fee per day. So, yep, no problem. So what we're looking at is some sort of fee to charge the property owner that is non-compliant to start with, rather than just saying you're non-compliant, shift it over to the attorney's office, and there's another timeline there. As far as what the fee amount would be, it would be on the county fee schedule. For example, it could be $75 a day, something like that. I thought I'd at least throw that out to the board. The Board of Adjustments right now, their feedback was they were favorable to do that if it was legal and done correctly with a policy and a procedure.
Mr. Chair,
Go
well,
ahead.
in my experience, as limited as it has been, is that I have seen some areas where people have kind of ignored the expectations that we've put them in trying to clean things up or follow procedures. So I see some value in having some authority there and be able to set some fines.
I think I'm going to have to just think about it some more. I just don't know that my initial thought is I don't like that. I think what we're trying to do here is what I think is get people in compliance. It's funny how people they don't want any regulations until their neighbor next door is doing something that they don't like. And then the first call they make is to here. So, obviously we have to have some regulations, but I just don't want us to go overboard. And so the fee schedule, I'll have to give that some thought, but we're not making a decision today, obviously.
No.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes,
might,
Commissioner Barrows.
this begs the age-old issue of begging forgiveness after the fact.
Yes.
And so I think we should seriously consider putting some teeth to this issue so that they aren't coming and doing that. I do have one concern, there's people who, I guess if you violate, and whether your economic situation is in life we can't consider that. You shouldn't have violated in the first place. You should have followed the rules as they're written, and then you wouldn't be in that situation. So, but there are some people who, no matter what we put, they can violate it and they don't have any problem paying a fine. But we can't be so outrageous with a fine that, you know, the average Joe can't pay it. So that's just a consideration, but we do have to have something that has some teeth to it that makes people think twice before they go ahead and do it and follow the rules.
All right.
Next.
Last item for discussion today is we do have a requirement in our land use ordinance that says if you're pulling a permit or applying for a land use permit within the first 500 feet of a lake, shoreline protection zone, that if it needs a compliance inspection, that it also needs an assessment done, which typically means a pumping and a checking of sort of the sludge levels. Our proposal is to remove that requirement from the ordinance, just to sort of clean that up.
Mr. Chair, if I might,
Commissioner
that's only
Barrows?
on lakes though, correct? It's not on the Mississippi River.
I'll double check that, but no, it would be for any rivers within the first 300 feet and lakes within the first 500 feet. Excuse me.
Okay, and that meets MHB's requirements?
This would be separate from that, and our restrictions would be more restrictive than theirs. So that probably wouldn't weigh into this equation in terms of being less restrictive than the NHB.
Anything else?
Well, I don't think you're
Mr.
going to
Franzi?
I don't think you're going to go to number 16, but tell me exactly what a bluff impact zone is.
So we have certain criteria for what a bluff is in the county. If it's at least 25 feet high, vertical, and 30% slope, the state shoreline rules have said that is a bluff and it needs to be protected. So protection means nothing can be done within the bluff except for very limited clearing for a walkway, and also 30 feet from the toe and the top of the bluff is also a restricted area. So it really means the bluff impact zone, the BIZ, is 30 feet from the toe or top of a bluff where development is very restricted. So getting to that number 60, which I wasn't going to get into, in practice for many years we've said you can't put septic systems within that protected zone, but it doesn't really say it overtly in our ordinance. We want to clean that up to make sure the practice matches what is in the ordinance.
Thanks.
Any other questions of Jake? Well, what do you anticipate is our timeline on this work product?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The proposed next steps, as we've sort of scoped it out, are to work diligently now with Scott Anderson, our legal counsel, Ben Olson, our consultant, to really get the language and the strikeouts actually in the ordinance. Right now, we're dealing with a little bit more conceptualized, but to really go through the entire thing and do that. And then, well, we would propose at that point to go through a 30-day public comment period, set a public hearing, notify the DNR, MPCA, and cities, townships, all that kind of thing, and move forward. But if there's the concept, Mr. Chair, that you feel that needs to change.
Well, no, I don't think so. It's just that I was saying that we all have homework now to take home, and I'm saying that this is the third Tuesday of the month. Next week is the county board meeting. I'm not ready to say a public hearing at the next board meeting, because that's a week away. I'd like to look this over, and then I would encourage the other commissioners that as they look through this and they see something that they think should need to be changed or something, maybe to just let you know. And I think it's just it's a work product and work in motion. Does that make sense? Or?
The proposal, yep.
Yeah.
The proposal that we had, if there wasn't any hiccups, would be to hold a public hearing in June.
Okay.
And then
Perfect.
seek approval at the end of July.
Okay.
I didn't know if that fit well with what you
No,
were thinking there.
That sounds good. That sounds good, because I think once we go home and we read through all of these, I mean, we didn't go through them one by one and look through them and say, don't know that I like this, then I think we need to have another conversation And it might be another conversation as, at the May Committee of the Whole meeting,
Absolutely.
is what I'm thinking, unless somebody else has a better idea.
Nope, that's good.
All right, I guess if nothing else, we're adjourned for the day.
Thanks, Jake.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Yes, thank you.